Howdy y'all, it's Bridget from the Clifton Institute here in our lovely 100-acre experimental grassland. I don't know if you can see across the field, the sun is just setting. It's 4:30 in December, so the days are really short, it's cold, all the insects have disappeared underground, or they're in hollow stems, or they're waiting it out as eggs for warm weather to come back. I'm here at flag 15, if you're familiar. We've got some coralberry here, we've got Indiangrass in the background. And to some people, the grassland might look dead this time of year. There's certainly a lot of brown, and it could be quiet too, so the tree swallows have gone for the summertime, but we get things like northern harriers that will come. This is the perfect time of night to see them too, coasting along above the grass, looking for voles and things. But really the plants are alive too, many of them underground. So there'll be these green stems that will be under the soil, and as soon as the days get long and the weather gets warm, they'll send new shoots up. So even though it might look dead, there's lots and lots of things alive in this grassland right now. And in March we'll come out, we will take the tractor, we'll hook up the bush hog, the big mowing blades, and we'll mow down all of last year's growth. And then we'll take our drip torches and our fire gear and our water tanks, and we'll burn a huge chunk. So half gets mowed and half gets burned. And from that flat, barren looking earth will come masses of green shoots, and with the masses of green shoots come insects that are eating them, and with the insects eating those green shoots come the birds to eat the insects, and it all comes alive again. So it's a really exciting thing to see. I'm glad you got to see it in the fall. I hope you can see it again in the spring too. But I just wanted to thank everyone for such a great fall field season. You should be so proud of yourselves. It was hot, it was rainy, it was windy, it was uphill, it was thorny, it was ticky. And you were brave and you came anyway, and you collected this awesome data, and you got to be in this beautiful place learning something new about the world that no one knew before. So you should be really proud of yourselves. I mean, pat on the back, everyone. And let's dive into the data, shall we? So this was our second official season surveying the grasslands with school groups, and boy, was it a big one. We had almost 500 students from 12 groups spend time in our grasslands this fall, which is crazy. And all of this would not have been possible without the very generous help from our volunteers, Willie, Jane, Allison, Jan, Rebecca, Sandy, Natalie, and Dan, who contributed upwards of 90 hours. Say it again, 90 hours getting our field crews prepped and keeping data collection running in all sorts of conditions. So thank you guys. And as a team, we surveyed 1,110 square meters of grasslands this year. Phew! And y'all were hiking up and down hills, catching bugs with jars and sweep nets, and poking around in big tangles of plants. And despite the ticks and thorns and sweat, we also saw awesome things like kestrels and bluebirds and praying mantises and swans napping on the dam. So it's a good reminder that sometimes you have to get uncomfortable to find magical things. Okay, so here's a map of Clifton. Here's the house, here's the upper pond, here's the lower pond. And in our experimental grassland out here, we tried a couple different things to prepare the land for our big experiment. In this solid section, we did nothing. It's our control. In this striped section, we sprayed it once with herbicide back in 2019 to kill non-native grasses like fescue. And most folks were collecting data in this solid area here, but one group did go all the way out to this striped area. We also did a little bit of collecting here in Turkey Gap, but every group was comparing a grassland that gets mowed once a year to a grassland that gets burned once a year, no matter where you are on the property. And it's pretty amazing how much just mowing once a year versus all the time can do to a grassland. So this is what the experimental pasture looked like back in October 2013 when there had been cows out there. And you can see it's mostly just fescue. It's pretty green. And here it is 1 year into the experiment. And you can see all these different patches of color are different groups of plants. There's probably some blackberries. Maybe this is little bluestem or Indian grass. So again, 2013 and 2020. Pretty crazy, right?
Okay, as a reminder, here's how we did the surveys. So each group got split into teams, and then we walked down the dividing line between the mowed areas and the burned areas. And each team was responsible for examining a 10 by 1 meter chunk of land between two little tiny pink numbered flags. And different grades had different numbers of target plants. So there were 5 plants for the lower elementary, all the way up to 15 plants for high schoolers. And teams reported whether or not they saw each of their target plants in their chunk. Like, is little blue stem there or is it not there? And so what did we find? So each group surveyed at least these 5 plants. We have 2 native bunch grasses, Indiangrass and little blue stem. We've got 2 woody species, Coralberry and blackberry. And then we've got 1 wildflower, crownbeard. And the height of the bar tells you how many chunks we found that plant in. So take a second and see if you notice any patterns. And when you're looking for patterns, a good thing to look at is which group has the tallest bars, which group has the shortest bars, and which plant has a different height of the blue bar versus the red bar. Okay, so when I look at this graph, I notice that we found coralberry everywhere. I believe we found coralberry in every single burned plot that we looked at, actually. And I also noticed that for all of the plants, the red bar is higher than the blue bar, which means that we found that plant more often in the burned plots than the mowed plots. So I wonder what's going on there. Like, do all species grow better when they get burned once a year? Or is it because we always started our surveys by looking on the mowed side, and that by the time we looked at the burn side, our eyes were better at recognizing those species? I don't know. It would be a cool experiment to test that. So if you were a group that looked at all 15 different kinds of plants, thank you. And here's a graph of what you found. And for the rest of the graphs, the numbers on this vertical axis over here represent the proportion of plots that we found that plant in. So in other words, what percent out of the total number of chunks that we surveyed this year did we find this kind of plant in? And if looking at this graph is overwhelming to you, as it is for me, one way to simplify what we're looking at is to group these 15 species into 3 different categories. So we've got grasses in green, woodies in brown, and wildflowers in pink. All of these plants have flowers. They all make flowers, even grasses. But we sometimes group flowering plants according to what role they play in an ecosystem. So for example, grass pollen is moved around by the wind, not by birds or insects. So they don't make pollen or nectar to feed those things. But their seeds and leaves make for important food and shelter for animals in the winter. And we want a grassland to be like grassy. We don't want a lot of woody plants like trees and vines. And while those shrubby places make good spots for animals to hide, like we know box turtles love blackberry thickets now, too many of them, and the grassland will slowly start to turn into a shrubland, and then that will slowly turn into a forest, and the grasses will disappear. So we don't want too many woody plants in our grassland. And then lastly, we have wildflowers. These plants are food for different kinds of caterpillars, and their flowers attract all different kinds of animals. So we also want there to be lots of wildflowers mixed in with a bunch of grasses. So again, take a second. What do you notice? So I noticed that both species of woody plants, coralberry and blackberry, seem to be more common in the burn plots, which might mean that burning is just not good enough at killing woody plants, and it won't keep those woody plants from taking hold. But I also notice that our important native bunch grasses, Indiangrass and little blue stem, seem to be more often present on the burn side. And it also looks like some wildflowers that we really love, like goldenrod and ironweed, are also found more often on the burn side, while others, like bush clover and horse nettle, are found more on the mowed side. So while mowing may be a little better at keeping woody things at bay, it seems like our favorite grasses and wildflowers are more often found on the burn side. But we also have evidence that things change from year to year. So here are 3 grasses whose results changed between 2022 and 2023. In pale blue and red are last year's numbers, and then in dark blue and red are this year's numbers. So for Indiangrass, we found more in the burn plots both years, but we found more total Indiangrass in more of the plots this year. So it seems to maybe becoming more abundant. Purple top was found more in the mowed section last year, but then this year we found it more in the bird section. So that's weird. And then carpet grass, which is an invasive grass from Australia, has been found more in burn plots both years, but we actually found it less often this year than last year, which is great news. But why? Why do we see these differences? The data we collected can't tell us why we see the trends we do. It only tells us that trends exist. And a really important thing to think about is if we see those trends because we made some kind of mistake. Like, are grasses really becoming more prevalent, or are we just getting better at identifying them? And so to try and get a sense of how our K-12 teams were doing with surveying, us Clifton staff, Julie, Eleanor, and I went out and surveyed all the plots ourselves just to see what we could find. And you can see that in general, our results are very similar. So the K-12 chart is on the top and our Clifton staff data is on the bottom, but the species are in the same order. And it looks like the K-12 teams found a little more Indiangrass and little bluestem than we did. And the Clifton staff found a little more of the other kinds of grasses and more of the wildflowers than K-12 students did. And circled in blue are trends that were different between the two teams. So for example, K-12 teams found blackberry more often on the burn side, whereas the Clifton staff found it more often on the mowed side. But that said, these results are really close, which is crazy that with only 30 minutes of plant boot camp, y'all made great field botanists. So congratulations, you should be so proud. Okay, so let's talk about the next link up the food chain, my favorite, which is bugs. And so maybe we think that plants are different between the mowed and burn side, but so what? Like, does that affect bugs? So some of you helped us count insects using very similar methods to how we surveyed plants. Teams of students walked a trail between the mowed and the burn plots, and they spent 5 minutes thrashing away with a sweep net at each side with bug jars to catch and identify as many bugs as they could in that time on the mowed side and then the burn side. And it looks like mowed and burn were basically the same. We found basically the same number of bugs on each side, maybe a few more in the burn, but more or less even Stevens. But here they are broken down by order. So we've got our grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. We've got our flies. We've got our ants, bees, and wasps, our true bugs, our beetles, our moths and butterflies, our spiders, and our UBOs, unidentified buggy object. So pause here. And again, look for patterns like what's there the most of, what's there the least of, and which have different height blue and red bars. So I noticed that by far we found the most ants, bees, and wasps, like a lot. And I think that most of these came from when people were sweeping and they would just get into a pocket of ants and they would open their nets up and there would be like 30 tiny ants in there. We also found more true bugs, beetles, and caterpillars in the burn side, which is cool, but more spiders and flies on the mowed side. So I wonder what's going on there. And you might remember that one reason we're studying bugs in the first place is because they're food for American kestrels, this tiny falcon whose numbers have been going down for a while now. And this year we put cameras in nest boxes to spy on them and what kind of food they're actually eating. And sure enough, here we have a video. A male. Oh, he's talking to himself. You can tell he's a male because he has blue, kind of slatey blue wings, and there he is dangling a big dragonfly from his mouth. Here we have, you can already see, there's a chunk of butterfly down here, tiger swallowtail butterfly. Whoa! In comes mom. She's got brown wings. Oh, she's trying to decide, which baby do I try and feed? There's so many. 1, 2, 3, 4 babies. And then we've got, whoop, I don't know if you can see, this is a big hairy spider in this male's mouth. So we know now they eat spiders too. Down the hatch, and he's out. So yes, evidence, they're totally eating bugs. And here we have, this is our researcher, Sydney. So she dug around in bags of stuff that we took out of their nest boxes. And then she separated out like a pile of bug bits, a pile of rodent bits, a pile of bird bits, a pile of lizard bits. And you can see this is a picture from under the microscope of just beetle bits. Here's like some wings and a belly and a leg and a head. And these are all from a beetle called a rainbow scarab, which is a kind of a dung beetle. So I'll let you think about that for a minute. And here's a picture of just wings. Like, here are some cicada wings. Here are some grasshopper wings. This looks like the wing of maybe a carpenter bee or some kind of, bee or wasp. And then legs. So many legs. Look at all these beetle legs. All these little green shiny legs, beetle legs. This big leg, grasshopper leg. So they're eating a lot of different kinds of bugs, and they're also eating a lot of bugs. And what surprised me was how many beetles they ate. I mean, I had no idea. So here are the big takeaways for me from this season. 1, burning seemed to be better for plants we love, like Indiangrass and little bluestem and goldenrod, though it didn't really help keep woody plants at bay, which might mean that if we only burned, woody plants might eventually take over. But plants also seem to be changing just in the last 2 years, so who knows what we'll find next year. 2, as for bugs, we just flat out need more data. So right now, one side doesn't look buggier than the other, really, though there's some differences depending on what kind of bug you're talking about. But this was our first year using this method, so I'm excited to see what happens with another year of bug data under our belts. And thirdly, I learned that looking at grasslands from a lot of different angles of the food chain, like from plants to insects to birds, left us with even more questions than answered. This is classic science. Like, what happened to the carpet grass? Or why is there so much coralberry? Or are there more beetles on the burn side because they're eating the plants on the burn side? Or is it because the soil is less compacted over there because the tractor isn't driving around on it? And we've had students suggest a few other cool experiments, like to try covering part of the mowed area in cow poop. So it'd be more like bison were there since, like tractors don't poop. So they're not the most realistic fake bison. Or try spreading ashes over the mowed section to see if it would become more like the burn section. So a million experiments you could do. If you ever have ideas like this, that is what field stations are for, and we can work with you to get that experiment set up. But most importantly, we learned that you guys are natural naturalists. You are enthusiastic and observant, even in challenging conditions. You can learn how to tell the difference between grasses. Like, how many people do you know who can do that? And you can use a sweep net to tell a beetle from a true bug. Like, that's tricky stuff. And you went out and examined this really complicated patch of land to try and solve some mysteries about how what humans do to land affects the plants and animals that share that space. So thank you. And Happy New Year. Bye, y'all.